to the My Generation podcast. Hope you're all doing well. Today I am sat in the workshop, which is why things may sound a little bit more echoey than usual, of Joel Tarr. He's a blacksmith local to the area of Kent, based in Ashford, and I'm going to be talking today about Joel's blacksmith work with him. He makes plant supports, sculptures, pieces of art, and we want to ask him about his process. Welcome to the show, Joel.
Thank you, Max.
No problem. So my first real line of questioning, I'm actually firstly just going to ask, what is blacksmithing really?
Blacksmithing is basically a process of getting steel, getting iron hot and hammering it and twisting it and folding it and bending it and creating interesting shapes.
But we've just been doing a little bit earlier. What were we making then?
Earlier I was making a tool called a spring swage. Basically it's kind of like a clapper which has indentations in it, and the indentation that I was putting into it was of an acorn, because what I'm going to be doing is giving some lessons for introductory experience day type lessons. And one of the things that I was going to get folks to make was like acorn key rings. So what they'll be doing is getting bars of steel hot and then putting them into these spring swages, these clapper tools, and hammering on that, and by sort of carefully rotating the bar, out will come an acorn shape.
Lovely. So you're passing on your knowledge really when you're doing lessons. But before that, we're going back into the past. What was actually your route into blacksmithing?
My route into blacksmithing was slightly unusual. I was studying media studies at college, and near the end of my course I got food poisoning, which really messed me up, and it left me with chronic fatigue syndrome and various gut problems, which meant that from then on really I struggled to fit in with other people's schedules. Because my health was just so up and down. And after a number of years of bouncing around from doctor to doctor and various alternative doctors, and just sort of treading water, working in a shop in retail, I decided that I was going out of my mind, and I had to sort of just accept my lot and move on and teach myself something where I could work on my own schedule and be my own boss, and I opted to teach myself blacksmithing.
So it's interesting because of all the things to go into, what was it about blacksmithing that drew you into taking this career path? I
guess the thing that most drew me in about blacksmithing is that I always wanted to do something manual. It's something that has an artistic outlet, and kind of artistry is like in the blood, so to speak. My mum's a makeup artist and my dad's an architect, so that was kind of a big part of it. I wanted to do something creative, but also I've always been a little bit of, I don't know, pyromaniac. Well, sparks and danger is kind of up my street.
Yeah, well, it varies quite a lot to media, doesn't it? So when you were on your media course, were you quite physical and hands-on away from the lecture room?
Blacksmithing is definitely quite different from media.
Very.
Though I tried to sort of, in my head, justify my interest in the media by the fact that I was mainly interested in editing.
Yeah.
And editing, like, even though you're only clicking a mouse and dragging bits around, it did still feel quite manipulative.
So it's almost like in the same way that you manipulate steel and metal, is it the same sort of vibe that you were getting when you were doing media?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like with editing, you're presented with material which is often beyond your control, and you're just kind of trying to create something out of it. But with this, everything be on your head, because you're the one who designs it, you're the one who makes it,
And so what is it that you make then?
Well, I'd say at the minute, my bread and butter is mainly architectural ironwork, bespoke architectural ironwork, so things like gates, and also I do sculptures and such like. It's always everything's always in an artistic element, so it's not kind of runs of industrial, spiky, angry looking security fencing. It's decorative gates that are sort of as much pieces of art as they are something to keep the dogs in or whatever.
Yeah, so the way you sort of talk about it, it's all coming from a place of art. You view this as its own form, really.
The blacksmithing nowadays is definitely something which it has its kind of soul in metal artistry. I mean, it was once upon a time the sort of thing where it was much more of a kind of agricultural and industrial process, and it was something that was involved in everything, railways through to like the village blacksmith who would make nails. But nowadays it's sort of primarily something that's fulfilling a market for people who want something different, who want something unique, and quite often themselves have a bit of an artistic eye, and so it's something where we're fulfilling. We're the only people who can do this. You can't buy the stuff online because it's not bespoke. Other sort of metal workers can't get to the same level of artistry because they don't get the metal hot, and without getting it hot you can't really create as many shapes.
Yeah, so it's interesting how the industry's kind of changed then. So before it was basically a super integral part of every single village, and would have been used to make more everyday things.
The irony of the job is that the process of hammering hot steel has been around for centuries, so that's really, well, I should say hot iron, because nowadays we use steel, but once upon a time it was iron. That process and the techniques and the way you do that has been around for centuries, so it's no different. But what is created nowadays is often quite different, and also there's more tools around nowadays like welders and plasma cutters and all these things that are at your disposal to use, and it's a lot. There's a lot of overlap with what's been there in the past, but also a hell of a lot of more potential nowadays.
Yeah, and speaking of the tools, I mean, we're sat in effectively a cave. It's just surrounded by tons of tools. Could you maybe point out one or two of the biggest things in this room for the listeners?
Well, I think the thing that everyone kind of gets drawn to is my power hammer, which is kind of like a repetitive hitting machine that you can use in a variety of ways to create various textures and shapes. Funnily enough, I think actually the thing that I most often get excited about is my big layout table that I have, which I think is about 1.2 tons and is dead flat. And it's 8 foot by 4 foot. The reason I get kind of excited about that versus welders and fly presses and that sort of stuff is because keeping things level is a very time consuming task, and so if you've got a dead flat surface, it's the best thing.
Yeah, so it just cuts out so much time from your day.
Yeah, for sure.
And all the tools in this room, I remember you telling me before, you build a lot of them yourself, so they've been just accumulated over years?
I'd say the majority of stuff that I've got is second-hand, and it's come from various auctions, farm clearance auctions and that sort of thing, because for the most part all this stuff is, it's old, it's manual stuff that was built to last a long time ago, and it lasts, so there's no need for modern stuff. But then for the more kind of hand tools like tongs and such like, and hammers, all that stuff is the kind of stuff that you make yourself to suit whatever job it is you're working on. And so it's kind of the nature of the job that your tool range is ever expanding, and that also includes stuff that you buy to suit future creative ideas that you might have that you want to fulfill. It's
like what you said with the acorn thing at the start, where like that is now a bespoke kind of thing you've got for one thing, but if you ever need it again, it's right there.
For sure, yeah. I mean, there's definitely the best tools are the ones that have multiple uses. So there's been times when I've made a tool for for the sake of one little thing, and then lo and behold, a while later, someone asks, I saw that you did that thing, and I'd like you to include that in a gate as a finial design or something like that. And cha-ching, you've doubled while you spent time making one tool thinking you're going to get one job out of it, and lo and behold, it's going to earn you money elsewhere.
Lovely, yeah. And so we've got sat right behind me an anvil. Where did you get this anvil from? What's its story?
That anvil, when I was getting into blacksmithing, another blacksmith once described to me Peter Wright anvils as the Rolls Royce of anvils. And that's a Peter Wright anvil, which is, I don't know how old it is, but it's it's got to be 150 years old.
Wow.
And I'd say that one, from memory, I think I worked out that one was something like 147 kilograms.
Oh.
These anvils are typically, their weight is given in the old hundredweight system, and they're the old hundredweights are imprinted onto the sides of them. I think I've got 4 anvils in here. That's actually not my largest one, but it's my best one, really.
And what about this makes it the best?
The thing that makes that anvil the best is because Peter Wright anvils were made only using new wrought iron. They weren't made from recycled iron. So the every area of it is kind of more sympathetic to the steel that you're going to be hammering onto it, because they don't chip and they just sound nice.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we're going to insert some sound bites like throughout this entire episode of just how these sound, and you can just get a feeling of it from that. And when we were using it earlier, so this anvil specifically, you say tools last a long time in this. How long are you expecting it to last for? It's been 150 years.
To be honest, that anvil could be older than that. I'm not sure how old it is, but I mean, it will. The thing is, like, there are folks out there who've got anvils and they use them in their garden to put plant pots on. There are also a number of people who use them as intended, like me. And for the folks who use them as intended, you look after it, you kind of respect its history, and you kind of know that you're just kind of a bit of a custodian of it for a while. And like, as long as no one down the line kind of abuses it, there's no reason why that thing won't be here for centuries more.
Yeah, it'll outlast most of the blacksmiths that use it.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and also other things in this room. You've got this massive furnace as well. How long has this been here for?
The forge, I made that. It was I was given a completely rotten through one by a local farrier who'd thought he'd properly stored it in his garage until he realised that his garage had a leak and had rotted his forge out. So he gave it to me, and I basically ditched everything in it and just used it as a template to completely re-weld it all back together. And when I moved into this workshop about 3 years ago, I brought it with me, so it's been here for a smidge over 3 years, I'd say. And
to the right of you, I don't know if we've mentioned this at all. This one, what is this? What am I looking at here?
That is a fly press. They're an amazingly versatile tool. Essentially, it's like a corkscrew. So it, as you swing the arm around on the top, the screw part spirals down and exerts force onto the thing below it. So the reason that it's completely versatile is because you can insert into it one shape and put below it another, and effectively you can interchange that to the nth degree to give you lots and lots of different textures and impressions. Currently, I have inserted up into it a heavy sphere, a solid sphere, and below it is basically a kind of pot. And the reason I've got that combination is because I make bowls, and I'm going to give folks lessons on making bowls, and it helps to kind of press the sheet steel into a bowl shape.
Wow. So with all of the machines here mentioned, I'm going to try and post a video up on the Facebook page so people can get at least an idea of what it looks like in here. And you can see the fly press, you can see the forge, you can see everything that people are interested in. The one mentioned that draws people's eye at the back. Could you please tell everyone about that? I've forgotten its name. I did.
Well, my power hammer is actually, as they go, very small. It's to get technical, the ram weight, i.e. the bit that comes down that sort of does the hammering. That's only weighs 25 kilograms. So that's not very big at all. I'm sure many folks will have wandered around Chatham dockyards and seen the ginormous power hammers that were there that are sort of tall as buildings.
Yeah.
Well, mine is kind of no taller than me.
Well, it's for a different purpose, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah. This is a lot smaller scale. I'm not hammering out industrial chain links for for ships, but it's a type that is all self-contained, and to be honest, the workings of it are slightly beyond me, because I'm a lot more. I've approached this from a sort of artistic background rather than an engineering background, but it works.
Yeah, you turn it on, does its job, turn it off again.
Yeah, feed it with oil.
So within this whole room, you've built this entire world for yourself from next to nothing. But what was your way in? Was there a show that you went on, or was there any hand-me-downs or anything that basically got you going with blacksmithing?
My kind of route into it was a bit unusual in that I didn't really have anyone to show me how to do this. I'm completely self-taught, so I learnt from books and YouTube really, and online forums. It wasn't the case that I grew up on a farm and people get exposed to welding and then they just kind of tinker with stuff from there. That wasn't really my route into it at all. It was through illness and being self-taught. I was quite fortunate that at an early stage I had a good bit of publicity exposure, in that I got myself onto a crafts program hosted by Monty Don. It was, I think the show was called Monty Don's Hard Crafts. It was a while ago now. And I was one of three, at the time, novice blacksmiths who were the feature of the show. And that was kind of a nice little nudge forward for me.
Yeah, some people can find you, can find your work. And again, in the YouTube video description, I'm going to put all the links to Joel's blacksmithing website, Facebook, Twitter, so you can find all his links there. He doesn't have to read out the URL for everyone. But so it's quite a strong way in. And now with your classes, you're almost passing that on as well.
Well, the funny thing about the job is that you need multiple strings to your bow, really. And for a long time I was very much consumed with only doing bespoke work, bespoke architectural work for folks, and that's all well and fine, but I had a back and shoulder injury a little while ago, and it really reminded me that you need multiple strings to your bow, to be putting products into shops and galleries and nurseries and all that kind of stuff, because if you're out injured, you need to have a fallback income, and so lessons is also one of those things for me, that it's a nice steady stream, because it doesn't involve quoting. Quoting for bespoke work is about the hardest thing you can do, but lessons are great because you set a price, people know what the price is, they come and pay for it, and they have their fun, and everyone's happy.
Yeah, and everyone's learning. You're also basically becoming a teacher in a way, effectively.
Yeah, it's. I've been told actually that I'm a very good teacher. I did a one. I was doing a demonstration one time at a event that I was doing at a garden nursery, and a young guy wanted to have a little go, so I gave him a sort of very little condensed lesson, and afterwards this chap hung around, and a guy who had been watching and sort of said, "Oh, where did you learn? Which school, which courses did you go? Who have you apprenticed for, etc. And I explained to him I'm self-taught, and he was saying, "Oh, you're very good at teaching." And with compliments from folks, you always say, "Oh, thank you very much." But he went on to say, "Oh, you should consider teaching more," and then explained that he was the prime warden of the worshipful company of Blacksmiths. So I was like,
wow,
oh my god, okay, thank you.
It's the right guy to be telling you that kind of compliment.
Yeah, it was like, okay, thanks.
If he's saying it, it's like everyone's waving at you. Hey Joel, we need this information. The people of Kent want this. Yeah, if they're shouting it at you, Joel, you've got to teach now. It's interesting because with a lot of professions like this, as you said, it tends to be almost a hand-me-down of sorts, where a father will pass it down to their kid and then to their kid. But with this kind of thing, as you said, you've just come at it from just yourself. But you said your father's an architect, yeah?
Yeah, my dad, he's an architect that is kind of focused on the conservation of listed and historic buildings. So as a kid, dragged around a lot of castles and whatever, so I'm sure all that kind of rubbed off on me a bit as well, the armour and gates and all that kind of stuff.
And you said with your mum about, before we came on to this, we were talking about plant supports that you make as well, and the fact that your mum was a major inspiration because you would make stuff for her.
Yeah, well, it didn't take my mum long to start requesting for various bits for her garden, and so she's often someone who feeds me with ideas about what would make good, a good saleable product. Is off the back of her, wanting stuff that, then I think, okay, well, fair enough, I'll turn this into a product which I'll supply to shops.
And she'd set quite a high standard, obviously.
Because she is herself very kind of artistic and sees how things can go in so many different ways, and that's helpful, but also sometimes you need to rein people in a bit.
Yeah, well, but because she doesn't know the technical side of it, I guess she's coming at it from a purely creative side. She's like, you can make anything, Joel, make it. Yeah,
right. And you kind of have to politely explain sometimes that that ain't how it works.
But it's nice when a parent wants to get involved, because this microphone that's sat in front of me, it's probably one of the best mics I've had, and sunk a lot of July's wages into this mic. And when I got it, ever since then, my dad has basically been saying, "Oh well, I'm going to be using your mic for everything now," and just wants to constantly take it and use it and prod it. So I understand when a parent gets a wind of your creative outlet. And so actually moving on to, you said about shows and events an event that you did for TV, and that's a string to your bow because you're having to be presentable on TV. Have there been any physical events that you've done sort of in the past couple of months that you want to talk about?
Well, at this point in time, at the end of the summer, the most recent sort of thing I've been involved with is putting work into a garden sculpture show at my workshops on the grounds of Godington House Estate, which is a Jacobean house just on the outskirts of Ashford, where they have gardens that are open to the public. And once a year they host a sculpture show, and I typically put a piece or two of work into that. So that's been my most recent thing, outside of my usual, commissioned work that I do.
Lovely. Well, actually, that's what Joel and I have to say so far about his blacksmithing. But do you have something to say on the subject? If you have a question for Joel, if you have maybe an experience yourself you wanted to talk to him about, put it in the comments here on YouTube, or you can go to the Facebook page at the My Generation podcast, and we will get those questions put back to Joel. And if we haven't scared him off from coming on the podcast again, we might be able to get him back on the show. And as I'm sort of saying this, Joel is like fidgeting with tools off mic.
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at the rivets on some tongs that I made the other day. So
I think that's kind of the power of radio here, or audio here, that you can sort of do that, and usually you can just about hear it.
Minor squeak.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll insert the power hammer sound there, and everyone will just be really confused. See, now he's using it as a head scratcher.
It's a multi-purpose tool.
But yeah, as you said earlier, if it's fulfilling more than one purpose, you're onto a winner. I did want to ask you actually about, because I know my dad would have these questions about lathes. Have you ever had a lathe before?
A lathe is a tool that I'm going to get at some point. It's not something that I've got at the minute. I don't know, in some respects I've kind of wanted to avoid going too much into cold working, because a lathe is for cold working metal, because I kind of feel like it will be a slippery slope where I don't ever light the fire again, and I don't ever do it. I'll just be machining stuff down. But yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things on my wish list.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you would never want to leave the forge, but so what's special then about heating something up versus not?
Well, the thing that about forging by hammering and twisting and all the rest of it is that it's just redistributing mass. It's not a reductive process. So, for example, if a machinist had a piece of steel and they wanted to work it down into the shape of an acorn, basically they're going to be using something like a lathe to shave bits off of it until it becomes the right shape. Whereas with blacksmithing and hammering, you can take a bar and put it into that shape of an acorn without taking anything away from it, and it's a better, in some respects it's a better use of material, and it can be quicker as well.
Yeah, as we saw earlier, the process for making those tools was really, really quick. You've put all that together in just a couple hours. There's no waste that we've got all over the floor. Usually we would go into local impact now, so how blacksmiths would affect locally, but I'd actually like to focus this question more on anyone who's been listening to this and has been more or less inspired into the idea of taking up blacksmithing, or even wanting to dive deeper into it. What would you recommend, Joel, to anyone who, whether they're from Kent or not, wanting to get into blacksmithing? What would you recommend they do?
Well, obviously take care and wear goggles and all that.
Yeah, health and safety.
Yeah, so I mean, because I'm self-taught, I think I've got good experience of YouTube and forums and all that kind of stuff. So there's plenty of sort of provisions out there nowadays, instructional videos on how you can make your own little setup in your back garden. So yeah, just go on to YouTube and look up things like brake drum forges, which is basically making a forge out of redundant car parts, and that's how I started. Wow. And you can use a hairdryer as a air supply, and my first anvil was just a bit of RSJ that I got, and just build up and start small and build up. Yeah,
because I imagine it's sort of like if you're a freelance videographer, you start off with a bit of kit that's like quite cheap, and then when you get jobs, the jobs pay for the next up bit of kit. And then, so as you're growing with income, you grow with what's in this room that we're surrounded by.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, if there's folks who want to get into it as a hobby, unless you've got a hell of a lot of money to throw at it in one go, you're probably never going to find everything you need in one go. But just building stuff up, checking out eBay, but for the better prices, farm auctions and tool auctions and stuff like that, the sort of slightly more niche things. No blacksmith ever wants to pay more for an item than they need to, so be sensible about things. Kind of check out, like, ask local farmers and stuff like that if they've got any old anvils knocking around, which lots of farmers have got anvils.
And why would a farmer have an anvil?
Because every farmer reverses into a gate and needs to at some point straighten up their gate.
Yeah.
And or they a bit of machinery lands on a hinge on a fence post or something, and then they've got to dig up the fence post and go and smash the hinge back into the right angle. So yeah, that's a lot of old bits of blacksmithing kit still knocking around on farms.
And so, for you, what did your first forge setup look like then? It must have been super, super basic.
My first forge setup was under the conker tree in my parents' garden.
Wow.
And it was made using a car brake drum, a bit of tubing, some gaffer tape, a hairdryer, and it was stacked up on a few bricks to just get it off the ground. And I had a carpenter's hammer, completely wrong kind of hammer.
Oh.
I had I just used to buy scraps of metal from local scrapyard, and just used to make a god awful noise hammering on a bit of RSJ as an anvil, and yeah, I just made a mess of things.
Wow, and so it just grew from there. So people would buy occasional things. To
Oh no, that was never at the stage of people buying.
No?
that was just
Hobby.
me. Yeah, but I did very quickly sort of throw myself into it, and kind of within like 6 months, I ditched my day job, and I decided to take it up as, you know, try and pursue it professionally.
And so in that vein of pursuing it professionally, what was the point where you realised, right, okay, I can now leave work, I can do this?
Well, I was extremely naive about you know, my potential at doing this professionally, but the point at which I thought, no, that's it, I'm going to sort of chuck in my 9 to 5 retail job, was when I took a month off work from the shop that I was working in at the time, because at the time I was on a lot of different tablets, and I just wanted to detox off them for a while, and I wanted to have a month of playing around, just hammering some metal. And in that time, you know, I kind of felt like my skills progressed, and my body felt a lot better by not, you know, taking these awful tablets just to get by day to day doing a job that I wasn't interested in. So it was in that month I thought, no, that's it, I'm done with that, and when I go back I'm going to hand in my notice and try and pursue this blacksmithing.
And that was it, all in. You had a month of, so was that month more just making things, seeing if this is something you could do on your own and just be happy with?
Yeah, pretty much. At that stage I was just still, I mean, I built like a kind of shack in my parents' garden, which I was working out. It was like very much a makeshift work shack. And yeah, I was just sort of kind of knocking around in there. But yeah, it was all that, you know, that month was enough for me to think, you know what, I've got to make a change. Otherwise I'm just going to be still bored to tears, you know, in my day job.
Yeah. Well, actually, and I asked this question at the start about what is blacksmithing and stuff, but I wanted to go over again. What personally to you is blacksmithing?
Well, I mean, aside from a way of making money, it's a kind of artistic outlet, because so much of what I do is a blend of aesthetics and function. But beyond that, it's something that allows me to be creative and earn money in a way that I can cope with, because my health still isn't great. I still have days when I'm completely wiped out, and I have quite severe gut problems, and you know, that's going to be something I'm living with forever. But there's no chance that I could really slot in with you know, a 9 to 5, or you know, if I tried to work for someone else, I know I wouldn't be able to do it. So it really does give me a way to kind of carry on living and working in a way that's manageable for me.
Yeah, and you've literally taken your restriction in life and built an entire new one around it. You've turned that into a positive, really, haven't you? Here.
Yeah, I mean, I was very naive when I sort of decided to go at it, you know, guns blazing. Right, you know, that's it. I'm gonna go at this. But as I've always sort of said to everybody, it's much easier. Hammering metal is the easiest bit of it. You know, hammering metal, shaping metal, that's the easy bit. It's learning how to be self-employed. That's the hard bit.
Yeah, and like managing your costs and
quoting.
You
know, anybody who does anything bespoke will always say that quoting is the hardest bit of the job.
Why is quoting so difficult?
Well, because for quite often you're never doing the same thing twice. I mean, for example, one of the last things I made was a 7 foot tall rose arch that was 2.5 meters wide and 4 meters long. I'd never made one of them before. You know, I knew what was going to be involved in it. I could guesstimate how long it would take, but I don't do any landscape work myself really. I had no idea how long it was going to take me to dig all the holes to go and cement it all in. So stuff like that catches you out, and that took me a day longer than I expected. But then, every job, you can kind of guesstimate a lot of the time how long something's going to take you, but there'll be something in a job that catches you out and you'll be there for twice as long as you thought.
Yeah, it's like any process where, I'm in film, so I kind of know when you're planning a filmmaking project, and everything always takes double, triple the time, because you go to location for the day, and every little tiny job just gets to you.
With this, for example, if you're trying to repair something and a bolt shears and gets stuck in a hole, well, there goes a day.
Yeah.
It's just the simplest thing could sometimes trip you up.
Yeah. But you've kept at it since, and that hasn't deterred you from keeping on.
Yeah, I swear a lot.
but no one hears that. No one hears that.
Yeah, it's fortunate that I don't really have any neighbours.
And we've bleeped it out of all the podcasts so far, all the times you've sworn. But we'll be going back to Joel in just a moment to wrap up this week's episode of the My Generation podcast. But there are future topics that we still want people to talk about. I'm going to be revisiting philosophy with Shami soon. And I'd like to get other perspectives and opinions on the show, talking about philosophy, meditation, mindfulness. If you've got a story relating to it, do get in touch with the Facebook page at the My Generation podcast. Inbox the page is the best way to get in touch about booking a potential episode on the podcast if you're interested in coming on to the show. So, Joel, final major question from me, really, and I ask everyone this at the end of every show. What have you learned from talking about blacksmithing in the last 40 minutes?
I suppose the thing that I always get reminded of with blacksmithing is kind of how unique it is, and how I settle into so much of a rhythm, and then when someone else comes along afresh and wants to ask questions and is kind of wowed by it, it's a nice reminder that what you do is kind of unique. It's
very unique. You said earlier there's like 15 people probably in Kent that do this.
Yeah, if that, and all probably at varying levels. Like, not everyone will be doing it as their own only source of income, but there ain't many people around doing it now.
Yeah, as a full-time blacksmith, it's a crazy unique job, but you love it, so...
Yep.
Well, thank you for coming on the show today, Joel.
No problems.
I'm probably also going to try and do an ambient mix, because we've recorded a lot of sounds of Joel working today. I'm going to try and put an ambient mix on the channel as well of all of Joel's work. That may already be up, depending on when this episode comes out. On my current podcast schedule, Joel's fiddling again, this is going to be going up on the 19th of December on the current schedule. And so... next week, and it scares me to say this because we're recording this in September, it'll be Christmas, and so I guess Merry Christmas. But we're saying this in September, but this whole bit, if I forward this through the schedule, will be gone. But if it's not, next week's Christmas, everyone, and me and Dan Inwood will be back doing the Christmas special, which is crazy to think is happening. He is our guest. This is the episode where I confirm it is Dan Inwood who is going to be doing our Christmas special, which is coming out on Christmas Day at 6 o'clock. So it's going to be on a Wednesday rather than a Thursday, because usually it's every single Thursday at 6 o'clock. But this year, Boxing Day will fall on the Thursday. So we will be putting it up Wednesday this time round. And you'll be able to tune in and hear me and Dan Inwood talk about all the festivities. But if you are in the mood still for any sort of festive related blacksmithing, we know the man. We know the man for you. But again, thank you for coming on the show, Joel.
No worries, it's a pleasure.
Will we be able to get you back on the show potentially?
Hell yeah!
Oh, of course. We're definitely getting him back. How it scared him off. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the description, or not in the description. That's where my information goes. Put them in the comments, because Joel can come back to those questions and maybe address them in a future episode as Kent's leading expert on blacksmithing. I've coined it there, so that's now true. So thank you all for listening to the My Generation podcast. Usually I'm kind of vague as to what the next week's episode is, but If it's the 19th of December today, or the 20th of December, whenever this is coming out, it'll be the 19th of December this is coming out. Wow. It's Christmas next week, everyone. Yeah, we're recording this in September, so that's fun to talk about, but you're already most of the way through your advent calendar. You will be as well.
Lactose-free advent calendar.
Lactose-free. I'll be getting the Lego advent calendar, so no chocolate at all. But the listeners definitely need to know that. I'm sure me and Dan will be addressing that next week anyway, and we'll be doing a ludicrous episode about that. But in the new year, we're getting Joel on very early on. I'll aim for about March time to get him on again to talk about blacksmithing. Look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the My Generation podcast, and we'll catch you next week.